friends, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Pinch Pumpkin series. In today's class, I'm going to be teaching you how to paint your bisque-fired pumpkin. So this step has to be completed after your pumpkin has already been through the kiln once. If you try to do this step while your pumpkin is still bone dry, so it hasn't been fired and it is still sort of a brown color, that means that you're doing this incorrectly and it's going to be super fragile before you're able to do anything with it. It's probably going to break. So it's really important that your pumpkin is a little bit more of like a peach tone, and that's how you can tell that it's been through the kiln once. You can also tap on it and it won't break. It's sort of more ceramic sounding, so it's not going to be kind of like dusty and chalky when you tap on it, and it won't break. So that's how you'll know when you're ready to complete this step. And I'm going to show you how to work with acrylic paint to complete this pumpkin. So let's begin. To get started, you're going to come over here to our painting section where you can find all of our acrylic paint, and you're going to be choosing a couple of colors. You have a lot of choice with how this pumpkin looks, so if you don't want it to be a super traditional orange pumpkin, then it doesn't have to be. You can make it however you'd like to, but we are going to be using the same techniques regardless, which means that we need to have a variety of colors. And my fear is that students are going to pick orange. They're going to take this and they're going to cover their entire pumpkin with one color, and that is absolutely not what I want for this project. What I would like for you to consider is ways that you can incorporate 3 different shades into your pumpkin. So we want to have some areas that are highlighted, we want to have our medium tones, and then we also need a tone for our shaded areas or the creases in between the sections of our pumpkin. So we're trying to accentuate those areas, we're trying to add in some value, some variety, and make it look a bit more realistic. So we're going to collect 3 different colors, and rather than just choosing orange and rather than just choosing 3 colors, I'm actually going to mix some of these colors together. So I am going to select orange. I might throw in some of this kind of golden yellow, and I'm actually going to grab some white as well. We've got a lot of different types of paint. It's all acrylic, it doesn't really matter, so whatever is back here you can grab as long as it's the color that you're looking for. So I'm going to grab some white, and I'm also going to grab some of this burnt ochre. I really like that for a shading color, especially with a warmer tone. So rather than just choosing like black for a shadow, I think it's nicer to continue the warmth of the orange with a brown. So I'm going to grab these 4 colors and I'm going to be mixing them in something that I can keep if I decide that I like these colors and if I don't finish painting my pumpkin in one sitting, which is perfectly normal and happens quite often. So I'm just going to come over here to this section just down below, and you can see that there's a couple of different things you're going to need here. So you're going to grab one of these. They're actually meant for horse vitamins, but we get them donated, which is really great, and we use them quite often. So if you don't finish working on your pumpkin, we can cover these little containers with tape, which is really great. So we're going to be mixing our colors in here, and we're also going to grab one of these water cups. So it's really great because it's got 2 different sections, one area for your clean water and one area for when you're trying to remove the paint out of your brush. So we're going to grab one of these water cups, and then we're also going to grab a brush set for our table, and it should match the number that's on your table, and you're just going to grab this and bring it back to your table with all of your supplies. When you're setting up at your table, it's also really helpful to have something underneath your pumpkin so that you aren't making a mess that you'll have to scrub off of the table. And instead, we're going to just grab a piece of printer paper from the front of the room so that you can just throw that away when you're finished rather than having to scrub the table. So right up by the front door, we're just going to grab one piece of printer paper. Going to bring that back to your table so that you don't have to clean up as much later. So now I'm going to just put my paint into my paint palette, essentially, or this vitamin container. Some of these still have crumbs from the vitamins in there, so you can just sort of like swipe it out or just like tap it upside down, and that usually gets most of it out. So one very big misconception when students are getting their paint is the amount of paint that they need. And this is not a large surface area, but I see students all the time taking just a massive amount of this paint. So in this instance, less is more. So we really want to be careful not to overdo it. So I'd say about the size of a quarter for each tone is probably enough. So I'd say that is probably good for just a base color. Then I'm going to take my yellow and I'm going to add about that amount. So about the size of a quarter. And it is a little stringy, so you just kind of have to let it plop down. There's my next color. That is plenty, so I'm going to just take a much smaller amount for my 2 accent colors. So this is just for highlights, this is for my shading. So I'm not going to take very much of this, and this is how much I got of each one. So I ended up not having enough in that smaller container for the white. I was trying to get it out, and it was just splattering a bunch and was sort of liquidy, so I switched to using one of these larger tubs. And it's really important that as you're pouring, you don't get too much from these, especially. It is a little bit trickier. So just make sure that with these you're extra careful. So I've got all 4 of my colors, and I'm just going to set that off to the side, and I'll set my pumpkin on my piece of paper so that as I'm painting, I'm not getting this all over the table. Now I'm going to look in my paintbrush set that I grabbed, and I'd say working with a smaller flat brush is what we're going for. So I'm just gonna grab something like this, and I want to just consider where I'm going to be putting these colors. And I want to be thinking about how I'm going to mix them on my pumpkin itself. So what I'm planning here is having a mixture of my yellow and orange. So my palette I'll maybe put back here so you guys can see. So I'm going to do a mixture of my yellow and orange in like the side areas. I'm going to add a little bit of the white over the top, and then I'm going to come in and add just a little bit of that burnt umber or the brown in the creases. And what I'm doing is trying to make this look more realistic. I'm trying to give it some variety, and I'm trying to show some natural shading here with my color choice. So I'm going to begin by just grabbing some of this orange, and I'm just going to, I don't have very much on my paintbrush. I want to avoid having like big globs. And I'm just going to take that and kind of move it down my pumpkin. And I see that that is really orange. So I'm going to take some of this yellow and just try to kind of change the tone. I might even start adding some of this white in the middle, just so that it's not so bright. And I'm just kind of using all of the colors together. I would like for you to consider other colors that you might try. It doesn't have to be the orange and yellow. You can try a white pumpkin. You can consider like leaving some streaky marks like this. Some texture is fine. I might even work to the other side of this section, and I'm gonna do one section at a time. I'm gonna start working in some more of this yellow. Maybe towards the top, I'm gonna have it be more yellow than orange. And so I'm grabbing mostly just this yellow, kind of bringing that down. So we've got those colors kind of mixing together, and now I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna mute it a little bit. This is kind of vibrant for me. So I'm gonna take some of this burnt umber, and I'm kind of bringing that in, just in a line along the side. Now I'm gonna take this brush and just sort of like swipe across the top, and while this is wet, it's gonna help me blend that into the section that's next to it. So I might take a little bit of the orange and yellow, kind of use that to help me blend it in a bit more. And we want to avoid having any really rough edges. So notice that I used a little bit more paint to help me blend that in a bit more. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Come in, just add in a line of that burnt umber brown color. And I didn't really go very far into the bottom section yet. I might just sort of paint that all at once. I'm really just focusing on having each of these sections look nice before I move on. So you can see it's a little bit rough right here. So I'm just gonna come in with a little bit of orange, and I'm really not adding very much at a time. I'm using really small amounts of paint, and I'm just trying to blend that together. But remember that I was trying to kind of keep some of this a bit lighter at the top, so I might add more yellow back in. I can always come in and add my white through the center like I was planning. So there's a little bit of a highlight in the center area. And we're just trying to make it look like it's got some shading to it, like it's got some variety and color, and like it's fading in a couple of different areas. So now I'm gonna switch to working on this next section that's directly next to it, and I want to keep in mind the way that I started so that I can keep it sort of consistent as I go through. So I'm adding that orange just kind of over that burnt umber, but it's still gonna show through because that is a much darker color. So I'm just kind of adjusting so that it is smooth on both sides. And I want to help it have a smooth transition. So that's really my main focus here. Now I'm going to come in with some of that yellow. And notice that I also have not touched my water at all. I've really just been allowing my colors to mix together without trying to get them wet, without trying to rinse it off. I want those colors to come together. So I'm going to add some white in the middle. Might come in with a little bit more orange at the base. We want to make sure that we don't leave any sections unpainted. So if there are any little indents, you need to make sure that you're getting into those spaces really well. Now, my paintbrush is starting to get a little bit on the dry side, which is the main indicator that you need to use just a little bit of water. So that's one instance where you can use a little bit of water. So I might just dip that in a few seconds. But first I'm gonna add back in just a little bit more of this burnt umber. And as I do that in between two sections, that means that I need to just come back in with a lighter color and help that to kind of fade out so that it's not quite so drastic on either side. So I'm going to bring in some of that orange to help it fade, not be quite so strong. And again, I'm going to bring in just a little bit of that white in the center. I'm going to leave it a little streaky, and that kind of makes it look a bit more realistic, like it's got some actual texture from the pumpkin. I might even try to add some highlights like near the top of these bumps. Just right in the middle there, I'm going to add a bit of white while it's still wet. If I were to add this white over the top of something that was dry, it wouldn't blend in together very well, which is why I really think it's valuable to work section by section. So if it is dried out, you need to go back through and add just another little layer of paint so that it will mix with those colors next to it. So I'm adding another little section of brown. I'm going to take some of the orange to help it blend in to the side. And we'll just work that same exact pattern all the way through so that it's nice and consistent. Here are some main painting tips. First, paint one section at a time on your pumpkin because it works much better to blend your colors while your paint is wet. Next, work with small amounts of paint on your paintbrush. You don't want to have too much paint on your brush at once because it makes it more difficult to blend. And last but not least, make sure that you're working with a very small amount of your darkest color because it's easy to overdo it that way. Now, I'd like for you to pause this video and start painting your pumpkin one section at a time. So at this point, I have gone through and just painted all the way around. It's still a little wet, and I think at this stage, I would like to go through and just sort of smooth it out a little bit. And I'm still working with the same paintbrush that I had before, but I am going to wash off my paint. So I'm gonna use the outside area of my cup to rinse off my dirty water, since that's where I've got the most space, and that means that that middle cell is going to be left with clean water. So I'm just kind of using my brush up against the side of my cup to really rinse out all of the excess paint from there. And then I'm going to take some of the clean water from the middle, and I'm going to choose maybe like my yellow, just because I would like to make my pumpkin maybe a little bit brighter. So I'm going to just take some water and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the yellow on the side of my little pill trough from Horse's little vitamin thing. So I'm just mixing a wash essentially. So I'm just adding a bunch of water to the corner of this and making it really runny. So I'm gonna keep adding a little bit of water. I'm going to take that wash and then I'm just gonna go over the entire pumpkin, just gently swiping across it so that it kind of smooths everything out and makes it a little bit more cohesive. But if you are doing this step and you notice that it's making all of your colors sort of blend into one, that might mean that you need to mix more water with your paint. So I'm making sure I'm not leaving any big sections or like puddles of water. I'm just going through and using that light wash just to kind of blend everything together a little bit more. And I'm doing that all the way through until I've done the entire pumpkin. And my goal there was, I used a lot of pressure actually while I was going through with that light wash, and I just tried to kind of fill in any rough spots. I tried to kind of smudge away some of the wet areas of that brown that were still a little rough looking. So it was just to make it a little bit more consistent all the way through so that I didn't have any big streaks of different colors. Pause the video here and add a very watered down wash over your entire pumpkin. So now that that step is done, the rest of my pumpkin is still drying, so as that's happening, I might switch to working on the stem. I still have yet to paint the bottom because I was working all the way through making the sections kind of blend together, so that required me to do the sections next to each other all at once, and to avoid getting my hands messy, I just painted the top part and I'll paint the bottom after. So to do that, I need to wait until the rest dries so that I can touch it. So I'm gonna focus now on painting the stem and leaf. This means that I need to add a little bit of green to my palette, and a color that would be good to place this next to would be either the white, the green, or the brown. I would not recommend placing this next to the orange. However, if you choose a really vibrant color of green, adding an orange or red, just a small amount to it, is actually a great way to make it more of a neutral color. So I'm going to take this green, and I think for myself and the way I'd like for my pumpkin to look, I'm going to add it next to my yellow. Don't need very much, so I just added a tiny bit next to my yellow. Now I'm going to take my brush, and I've just cleaned it in my water to make sure that I don't have any other colors. And I really do think it's helpful to mix your green with another color so that you don't just end up with solid green. Just like we did for our pumpkin, we don't want one solid color. We want this to be a bit more interesting to look at. So as I paint, I'm going to take a little bit of green, and I can also take just a little bit of that yellow, and I've got like a two-tone on my brush, so I've got a bit of green and a bit of yellow. And I'm going to take that, just small amounts, and I'm going to just paint over my leaf. And I'm being really careful not to go on the orange of my pumpkin. As you can see, it's just giving me an interesting mixture of those two colors. So again, I'm going to grab a little bit of my green on one side, about that much, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow on my other side. And you could do this with white, you could do this with brown. I'm just choosing these colors, but you are welcome to choose whatever you like. And the more you brush it on, the more those colors mix together, and we do want them to be separate from each other in some spaces. So I'm trying not to apply too much pressure when I'm using this two-tone method, because then my colors just mix together and it just becomes one solid color again, which is sort of what I didn't want. So we're just going to kind of swipe across, just kind of move locations and try not to blend it too much. You can blend it a little, but we want to see those two tones. Now at this point I have a wet pumpkin, so I'm not lifting this up to paint underneath my leaf quite yet, just because I want the rest of it to have a chance to dry before I'm putting my fingers on it. So I'm just painting the top part where I can access without having to lift up the rest of my pumpkin. And now I'll switch to painting the stem. Now pause the video and try painting your leaf with this two-tone method. As I was painting my stem and leaf, I was working with that two-tone combination the entire time. So I had half green, half yellow on my paintbrush. But I noticed I did need a little bit of water mixed in with some of my paint. As I was painting these little creases, it made it a lot more difficult when it was a drier texture to get into those little creases with the actual paint color. So I just went through and dipped, while I had my paint on my brush, I just dipped very gently into the water to make sure that I could get into those creases. Something else that was really helpful for me as I was working on this and trying not to get it on the orange, which is really difficult. So I worked with a flat brush the entire time, and as I was working, I made sure to keep the brush just as thin as possible, and that's another reason why it's beneficial to use a lot of water during this step, is to keep your brush a bit thinner. And then I just would push up against that part of the stem and pull up, rather than trying to brush down into that space, because that's kind of when you get those little accidents that happen when you kind of pull into a space and the rest of your green just kind of comes off into that corner. So I would start at the bottom and pull up, and I would kind of wiggle my brush into those spaces, using a little bit of that water again to make sure that it was easy to drip almost into the little creases right up against those colors where they meet. I also had to flip my project, and now it dries pretty quickly, so I was able to flip this project and work on some of the parts that are underneath, and I realized there were quite a few areas where I totally couldn't see that I hadn't painted all the way. So unless you're rotating your project all the way around, you might miss some sections of stem. I also painted the back of the leaf and chose to just use solid green there to make it look a little bit more contrasty with the leaf itself, and that is how I painted the stem. Now pause the video and paint your stem using all of the tips that we just discussed. So the next step is to flip this over and finish painting the bottom, which should be a pretty simple process. So I'm just going to do this very similarly to how I did the top. It doesn't have to be quite as perfect or as many value changes. I might just choose to paint the majority of this just solid orange. I can go through at the end and really try to add in a couple more colors just to make it tie together with the outside of the pumpkin a bit more. But I'm just going to paint most of this orange and then go back through and add a little bit just to help it tie in with the top of the pumpkin. So I've gone through and painted the bottom. It didn't have any real details, but people don't really see that, so it doesn't matter as much. So what I am looking for when you're finished painting your pumpkin is that you have a variety of colors in every single section minus the bottom. So if I can't see two tones of colors, so two different colors, the yellow and the green on the stem, or white or blue or brown that you mix, it doesn't really matter which colors. I just need to be able to see multiple colors in each section. I'm also looking to see that the sections that you painted show the creases have a darker value, and that the outer parts, the rounded set part of the section, is a lighter value. So when you do that, you should also have smooth transitions in between. So adding that light wash at the end can really be helpful, because I need to see the two differences between the values, but it also needs to have a smooth transition. So those are the things that I'm looking for, and make sure that you've got all of those things finished before you do this next step. The final step is to add a layer of high gloss Mod Podge, and you'll be doing this step outside. So I want you to check with me before you do this step for two reasons. First, we need to make sure that you've done everything that you need to do correctly on your pumpkin. The things I'll be looking for will be the smooth transitions, multiple colors in every part of your pumpkin, and that you don't have any overlapping colors or clear mistakes where you painted like green onto your orange pumpkin. So if you do that, make sure that you cover it up with the original color before you come and check with me. So you'll double check, make sure that you are ready. Pause the video here to make sure that you've met all of the expectations, and then check in with me before you move on to this next step. Once you've got my approval, you're going to take your project and you're going to take your piece of printer paper that you are painting on top of, and you're going to take that with you outside with a can of this high gloss Mod Podge spray, which can be found over here. So in this corner of the room, over by the invisible man in the corner, there is a cabinet that you're going to open, and that's where you will find all of the Mod Podge sprays. So grab one that isn't too empty, and you're going to take that with you outside with your pumpkin and your piece of printer paper. So I am just in the hallway just by the main office, and I'm gonna go out towards the lockers and the drama classroom, and this is the closest grassy area for you to go outside and spray in. To complete this step, you're just going to take your varnish can and you're going to shake it for just a couple of seconds to make sure that that mixture is all nice and even, and then you're going to spray with the nozzle pointed out towards your project. You want to stand about a foot away, and you just want it to look sort of wet on all sides. We don't need to spray the bottom. To carry this inside, you're going to just lift it up from the bottom of your piece of printer paper and hold it just like this. I would use two hands to make sure that you don't lose your project on the way back in. Your final step for this project is to head over to the Artsonia station to place your pumpkin on this white piece of paper, and then to take two quality photos. So I would like one that's from about this angle, and then one that's a detail shot of your stem. So you'll have two of those photos, and you'll post it on your assignment in Teams. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this final episode of the series. I hope that you end up loving your pumpkin and that you had a great time making it. Thanks for watching.